Hey, it's Jeff Zito, and thank you for listening to the Celebrity Jobber Podcast, which is number 1 on the Apple Podcast Music Interviews chart. So thank you very much for that. You can follow on Instagram, celebrity_jobber_podcast, and also youtube.com/the@celebrityjobber. And we're streaming on iHeart, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, wherever you listen to podcasts. So please subscribe. Would love a 5-star rating. And also, if you would please leave a review. You can check out past guests and episodes, which are online at celebrityjobber.com. My guest this week is a legendary singer-songwriter whose songs include Proud Mary, Bad Moon Rising, Fortunate Son, Down on the Corner, Who'll Stop the Rain, Up Around the Bend, Have You Ever Seen the Rain, Center Field, The Old Man Down the Road, and many, many more. He was the lead singer of the band Creedence Clearwater Revival, and then had a very successful solo career when that band parted ways back in 1972. We'll talk a little bit about him growing up, the music business, his big break, the moment that changed everything in his life, and, of course, his first job from Creedence Clearwater Revival. The iconic John Fogerty is my guest this week on Celebrity Jobber.
The Celebrity Jobber Podcast with Jeff Zito. If you like what you hear, please subscribe, give a 5-star rating, and leave a review. Check out all our past episodes on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you pod. What if these celebrities weren't famous? What would they have become? What was their first job? We're about to find out.
John, how are you, man?
I'm doing good, thank you.
Growing up in the 60s in the San Francisco area, I mean, everything was going on back then, you know. Do you look back nowadays and look back at that time growing up in such an important part of our culture?
Well, I do, but I think more so I remember how busy, how exciting, how tumultuous everything was, you know. A lot of different things were in motion, I suppose you'd say. And I kind of see it more from a personal perspective rather than something, you know, a kid later would read about it in a history book or something. But since we experienced it, it comes from personal recollection.
Yeah. And how was your growing up, John? I mean, did you have a fun growing up as a child?
Yeah, I grew up in a little town called El Cerrito. I think that was a wonderful place to grow up. It was a small town, and yet it was part of the Bay Area, so you're part of the big mega at the same time, you know, always in the shadow of San Francisco, I guess you'd say. But yet able, especially in my earlier years, it was pretty small, more like a village, I'd say, especially the years when I was learning about music and the big musical world out there. It was a great place to be.
And what got you interested in that big musical world out there? Did your mother or father, did they play music? What did they do for work?
Well, they didn't do it professionally. My mom played the piano. Something I found out, you know, when I was probably a little older, the first time I say older, I was about 6 or 7. My dad picked up a little toy harmonica and started playing Oh Susanna. And it just blew my mind. I didn't know he could do that. You know, I mean, I'd been probably watching him for a couple of years by the time I was 5, you know, and just didn't know that about him. My parents split up when I was quite young, so mostly I was influenced by my mom after that. One of the things my mom did that was very unusual, when I was 3 years old, she sat me down and gave me a little yellow kids record. It turned out that one side was Oh Susanna and the other side was Camptown Races. And she played the songs for me, and then she explained to me that Stephen Foster was the songwriter of both of those songs. And that's just a really unusual thing to do for a kid,
yeah,
a youngster. And so I've focused on that my whole life. I mean, I became aware of Stephen Foster's songs and sort of that whole realm of, what we now call Americana.
Right.
But it was just a wonderful world to me at the time.
The Celebrity Jobber Podcast with Jeff Zito. Celebrity Jobber.
And the beginnings of CCR, I would say the origin started in high school and maybe interrupted by a brief relationship with Uncle Sam. Would that be correct?
Well, yeah, we met in junior high, actually. Doug and Stu in Creedence. Of course, I'd known my brother Tom all my life.
Right.
And then, we kind of drifted apart in many different times through high school and the years after. Either people weren't playing, or in my case, I was playing with other musicians, that sort of thing. I got drafted in 1966, and so I was eventually into the Army Reserve. I was in the Army Reserve for about 3 years during those years, during the Vietnam time.
And can you tell me about if there was a particular moment that kind of everything changed for you, like maybe hearing a CCR record on the radio or getting that phone call maybe from a record label wanting to sign you? Can you think of a moment where everything changed for John Fogerty in your life? Everything went in the way that you wanted of your dreams? Well,
I think for me, the biggest moment that happened with a singular boom right then, rather than some sort of gradual process, was the day I wrote Proud Mary. Because, starting from when my mother told me about Stephen Foster and growing up and admiring many songwriters and great songs. Of course, my mom loved Hoagie Carmichael, let's say, and Old Buttermilk Sky and things like that. To even, when the Beatles started showing up on our shores and I learned who Lennon and McCartney were. The day I wrote Proud Mary, put it this way, I had admired songs all my life, but I had never written a really great song before. And the day that happened, I realized that Proud Mary was a classic. I mean, I looked at it and I was aware that this was far above anything I'd ever done before and that this song was destined to be a classic. I also knew it was a bit of humor at the time. I told myself, I'm the only one in the whole world that knows this. It was just sort of a strange feeling, but I was so positive that Proud Mary was far above, up in the clouds. So that was kind of a rite of passage. Minutes before I'd been here, and now I was, boom, there. Wow. And as you said, everything changed after that.
That is a remarkable story, and I understand. I kind of get it.
The Celebrity Jobber Podcast with Jeff Zito. The Celebrity Jobber Podcast with Jeff Zito.
I don't understand the music business, like you do. And I know there are so much behind the curtain that people don't understand. But you get a new album, which is coming out. It's all of your songs. It's called Legacy, the Creedence Clearwater Revival Years. And you didn't own this music. I don't understand how you can't own this music. You wrote it. It's yours. So explain a little bit about that to me and how you got it back.
Well, okay, I'll try and do it quickly and simply.
Yeah.
The four of us in the band who had just recently, I had changed the name to Creedence Clearwater Revival on Christmas Eve of 1967. This was early January 1968. We found ourselves at the office of Saul, who owned Fantasy. We signed a contract at that time, and the contract said that the label would, own our recordings, but it also said it would own any original songs that were written by any of the four of us. So at that moment in time, we were still all looking around as kind of a democracy, you might say, full of a lot of wishful thinking, and didn't really realize at that moment that I would be writing all the songs.
Right.
That kind of came in the next few months, where clearly I began to write these wonderful songs that, you know, we all know now. And so at the time of signing the contract, I didn't even realize that something I would do, you know, 6 months, 8 months, a year from now would be owned by Saul. And that's how that happened. So for the next 3 years, which was basically the career of Creedence, he owned everything that I wrote. The other fellows actually didn't write any songs during that period of time. And so then basically I was set on a path. Obviously that's an unfair thing. I'm writing the songs, but he owns them.
Yeah.
You know, it's pretty unfair. I was set onto a path that would take me almost the rest of my life to fix. And here we are up into about 2023, where I finally got that reversed, and I now own my own songs.
And that record is coming out on Friday, I believe. Is it the 22nd, John?
Yes, correct.
And
really what this record, I think, represents is beyond me actually getting the ownership of the songs back, re-recording these things and having them come, you know, this album is really nice. I really like it. I mean, I'm not sitting here trying to sell, you know, snow to Eskimos or something. It's a thing I really am behind, because it just feels wonderful. And, you know, until you hear it, you won't know what I'm saying. But once you hear it, you will know what I'm saying.
Right.
And I just believe that there's something at play here, that somehow this album sort of kind of restates the ownership, the authorship of these songs to the world. You know, it seems to be that that's what this is. At least that's how it feels to me.
I think it's very, very cool. John, I know we got to go. They're telling me we got to go, but I just have one last question.
The Celebrity Jobber Podcast with Jeff Zito. Celebrity Jobber.
Can you remember your very first job, and what was it?
Oh, my first job, I had a paper route.
Yeah, that was your very first job.
So I could buy a guitar, and that's what I did.
Your very first job was a paper route, and how old were you?
I was in the 5th grade. And I had a paper route till I was in the 10th grade. And then I started working in a gas station.
And you wanted to buy a guitar?
Yep. My first Sears guitar I paid for with that paper route.
That's incredible. John, again, a real pleasure speaking with you, and look forward to hearing the album.
Thank you very much. Have fun.
The legendary John Fogerty. So he had a paper route. That was his very first job. But this is the important part of that story. You know, he had the paper route when he was in 5th grade till he was in 10th grade. He used that money that he made from the paper route to buy his very first guitar. For some reason, that really resonated with me. You know, a paper route, that was my very first job too. And I wanted to save money for a brand new skateboard. I remember it was, I think it was $70. But I guess the lesson here is John Fogerty used his money to buy his very first guitar. He ended up writing some of the most classic songs in the history of rock and roll. You know, I did not end up being a professional skateboarder like Tony Hawk. So to know that when he was in the 5th grade that he was thinking about music and writing songs, I don't know, that really got me. And he also briefly touched on working at a gas station after the paper route. So that was probably his first real job, not trying to discount Paperboy as not a real job. But I think everybody knows where I'm coming from. John's dad worked on a printing press for the local newspaper. His mom taught the 2nd grade. And in his book, John stated that his parents were both alcoholics and they divorced when he was in the 3rd or the 4th grade. He said his parents both played a little bit of music, not professionally. Mom played the piano. His dad knew how to play the harmonica. But he pointed out a very important part of his life when he was like 3 years old. I have no idea how he could remember this. His mom played him some kind of kids record and mentioned to John how the songwriter of that kids record was Stephen Foster. And that somehow struck a chord with John, pardon the pun. I kind of thought that was an interesting story. And, talking about his big break, what changed John's life forever, interestingly enough, he didn't bring up a moment like when he signed his record contract or the first time he heard his song on the radio or the first time he gave an autograph. He said it was when he wrote the song Proud Mary. He said he instantly knew that song was going to be a classic. It was far superior than anything else he's ever written. And he jokingly said, though, he was the only one that knew this at the time. I thought that was really cool. And he was right. And then speaking of John's new album, Legacy, the Creedence Clearwater Revival Years, which is now out, it kind of gives you a look behind the curtain, if you will, about how shady the music business is or was, to where this guy wrote all of these songs, all of these classic hit songs. And when he signed the contract, it said that those songs were no longer owned by him. They were going to be owned by the record label, who didn't write any of the material. And you think about that and how this guy was making zero off of his own publishing for so many years. And he had to go to court and, get the rights back. It really a shame how he was taken advantage of back in those early years. And now releasing all those songs where he is getting all of the money from the record sales, and rightfully so. Legacy, the Creedence Clearwater Revival Years by John Fogerty, my guest this week on Celebrity Jobber. Just an incredible, iconic singer-songwriter. Looks really good. I mean, he's like in his 80s. The guy looks pretty great. And thank you so much for making this the #1 podcast on the Apple Podcast Music Interviews chart. Past guests and episodes you can find online at celebrityjobber.com and streaming everywhere you listen to podcasts, whether it's Apple Podcasts, Spotify, iHeart. We're streaming on all platforms. Please subscribe. Would love a 5-star rating and leave a review. The legendary John Fogerty. Very first job as a paper boy, he used that money to buy his very first guitar. Pretty incredible how it all connects with being the paper boy, isn't it? I think so. Have a great Labor Day weekend. Again, I appreciate you listening to another episode of the Celebrity Jobber podcast. And until next week, I'll see you then. I'm Jeff Zito.